An angel once descended on Jerusalem, not to shield it, but to strike it down. Sword drawn, it moved with divine purpose. In just 72 hours, 70,000 lives were wiped out. This wasn't the work of enemies. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was a plague sent straight from heaven, triggered by one shocking act: David's decision to count his people. But why would a simple census provoke such deadly wrath from God? It wasn't just about numbers. It was about trust. David counted his army to measure his own strength, not God's. He wanted to see how mighty his kingdom had become through his own power. This forgotten story reveals how pride can blind even the most godly leaders, how Satan can influence even the most faithful hearts, and why God sometimes must shatter our self-reliance before we destroy ourselves. Have you ever wondered what happens in heaven before disaster strikes earth? Most of us think God just points his finger, and judgment falls. But the truth is much more amazing. There's actually a meeting, a divine court session that takes place before heaven moves against sin. Picture this scene with us. High above the earth, beyond the clouds and stars, sits the throne room of God. Light, brighter than 1,000 suns, fills the space. Angels stand in perfect rows, their wings folded, their faces serious. They wait silently for God to speak. This isn't some small gathering. This is the full court of heaven. The Bible gives us a peek into this scene in Daniel 7:10. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Can you imagine that? Many angels, all in one place. That's what happened after David counted his army. When David finished his census, something shifted in the spiritual world. Books were opened in heaven. Records were checked. David had crossed a line, and now heaven had to respond. But here's something most people miss. God didn't rush into judgment. He carefully considered what should happen next. In this heavenly courtroom, one angel stood apart from the others, taller, stronger, with a sword that shined with holy fire. This was the destroying angel, heaven's messenger of judgment. His sword was ready, but still in its case. He waited for God's command, and nothing less would move him. Unlike our courts on earth, where judges can be unfair or make mistakes, this divine court weighed everything perfectly. Justice demanded a response to David's pride. Mercy looked for a way to restore, not just punish. Both were in perfect balance as God made his decision. The destroying angel never spoke a word. He didn't question or suggest. His only purpose was to deliver God's message, not with words, but with actions that would shake a kingdom and humble a king. Then came the decision. God would give David a choice between 3 punishments, not because God couldn't decide, but because each option would teach David something different about trusting God instead of his own strength. As the heavenly court session ended, the scene shifted. The angel received his instructions and prepared to visit earth. His sword would soon be drawn. Meanwhile, down below, completely unaware of what was coming, David was about to face the consequences of his pride. The king who had defeated giants was about to meet a force he couldn't fight with any weapon. What would David do when faced with God's judgment? And how would this destroying angel change Israel forever? The answer reveals something shocking about both divine justice and mercy, something most people completely miss. But before we move on to what happened next, we want you to think about something important. These stories aren't just ancient history. They show us how God responds when pride takes root in our hearts. Even the greatest kings, like David, had to learn that trusting in their own strength leads to disaster. If you want more powerful stories like this, where faith, failure, and redemption collide, subscribe to SenStories. Each week, we bring you dramatic biblical storytelling that reveals timeless truths in unforgettable ways. Don't just read the Bible, experience it. Just as David needed to learn it thousands of years ago. Have you ever wondered what happens when an angel of death receives its orders? We often think of messengers bringing words on scrolls, but God's heavenly messengers sometimes deliver their messages in much more powerful ways. As the heavenly court finished its session, the destroying angel left God's throne room. This wasn't some random spirit acting on its own. This was a divine messenger with exact instructions. moving with perfect purpose. The moment had come for the sword to leave its case. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly what this angel looked like, but we know one thing for sure. When it appeared over Israel, sword drawn, even the bravest warriors trembled. This wasn't a gentle guardian angel. This was a warrior of heaven, carrying judgment in its hands. What makes this story so chilling is how the angel worked. It didn't shout warnings or make speeches. Its actions were the message. The angel moved with terrible efficiency, not with rage or anger, but with the calm precision of a surgeon. Each movement had meaning. Each city it visited received the same silent message. Pride has consequences. The plague started spreading faster than any natural disease could travel. Families who had proudly stood to be counted during David's census now fell in grief as the angel passed by. The very people David had numbered to show his strength now showed his greatest weakness. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel from that morning until the end of the time designated. The Bible tells us, villages that were full of life in the morning lay silent by evening. The angel moved from north to south, from Dan to Beersheba, following the exact same route that Joab had traveled when counting the people. Think about that for a moment. The path of pride became the path of punishment. The same roads where David's officers had marched to count soldiers now felt the footsteps of heaven's warrior, bringing judgment. What seemed like chaos on earth was actually a carefully executed plan from heaven. Each death, though tragic, delivered part of the message God wanted David to understand. Numbers couldn't save him. Armies couldn't protect him. Only God could. Fathers who had proudly announced, "Count me," to census takers now fell without a sound. Mothers who had watched their sons be counted now watched those same sons slip away. In just days, tens of thousands had died. Yet, even in this terrible judgment, we see something remarkable. The angel possessed power over life and death, but remained under complete divine control. When God eventually said, "Enough," the angel immediately stopped. The sword that moved with perfect freedom still perfectly obeyed. This shows us something important about how God works. Even when judgment comes, it comes with purpose and limits. The destroying angel wasn't random or out of control. Every move it made was directed by divine wisdom. As the death count climbed toward 70,000, the angel approached Jerusalem. The holy city where David ruled was now directly in the path of heaven's messenger. Would the king who started this trouble now watch his capital city fall? Would the death angel's sword swing over Jerusalem as it had over so many other towns? The answer reveals something surprising about both God's judgment and his mercy. It shows us that even when the sword is drawn, heaven still listens for the prayers of a broken heart. Have you ever seen a sickness spread so fast that doctors can't explain it? Normal diseases follow rules. They need time to travel. They move along trade routes. They spread from person to person. But the plague that hit Israel after David's census broke all these rules. This wasn't just any sickness. This was heaven's message, written across an entire nation. As the angel's sword moved, death followed. Not randomly, but with purpose. Villages that were bustling with life in the morning lay silent by evening. The plague moved with supernatural speed, following the same path that Joab had taken months earlier to count the people. But wait, the people cried out, "We didn't count ourselves. The king ordered it. Why are we being punished?" This question echoed across Israel, as families watched their loved ones fall sick and die. From the northern borders of Dan to the southern town of Beersheba, confusion mixed with grief as the death count rose. Rich people couldn't buy their way out of this plague. Poor people couldn't hide from it. Young soldiers who had proudly stood tall to be counted now lay weak and dying. The plague didn't care about your money or your strength. It moved according to God's perfect plan. Can you imagine how fast this spread? Joab had spent nearly 10 months counting all the fighting men of Israel. The angel took just 3 days to strike down 70,000 of them. What took so long to build up was being torn down. In less than a week, hour by hour, the numbers grew. Messengers raced to Jerusalem with reports from across the kingdom. 50 dead in this village, 200 in that town, 1,000 in this region. Each report hit David like a hammer blow. The king who wanted to know how many soldiers he had was now learning how quickly those numbers could drop. People everywhere begged God to stop the plague. They offered sacrifices, they prayed, they wept. But the angel kept moving. The sword kept swinging. The message kept spreading. This wasn't just punishment, it was teaching. And the lesson wasn't complete yet. When David first chose this punishment, he said something very wise. "Let us fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great. But do not let me fall into human hands." Of the three options God gave him, famine, being chased by enemies, or plague, David picked the one that kept him directly in God's hands. He trusted God's mercy more than human mercy, even in judgment. As the angel moved closer to Jerusalem, a pattern became clear. This plague wasn't like a wildfire burning randomly wherever the wind blew. It moved with purpose toward the holy city, like it had a final destination in mind. And that's exactly what it had. The message in this plague spoke louder than words could. Do not put your trust in princes, in human beings who cannot save. Psalm 146, verse 3. Every death echoed this truth. Every tear shed reminded Israel that counting soldiers couldn't save them. Having a strong army couldn't protect them. Only God could. For the regular people caught in this divine message, it felt like the end of the world. But from heaven's view, even this terrible plague had limits and purpose. The angel wasn't out of control. Every move was measured. Every death counted. And as the destroyer approached Jerusalem, something was about to happen that would show both the terrible power of God's judgment and the even greater power of his mercy. The angel now stood at the edge of the holy city, sword raised, ready to bring the same destruction to Jerusalem that had already emptied villages across Israel. Would anything stop this heavenly warrior? Could anyone stand between God's judgment and the city David loved? What does it take to stop an angel with orders to destroy? Not armies, not walls, not weapons. As we're about to see, only one thing can halt heaven's warrior: a new command from the one who sent it. The destroying angel approached Jerusalem, sword raised high. The same being who had already brought death to 70,000 people now stood at the edge of the holy city. The plague that had swept through villages and towns was about to enter the capital itself. The message that had been written across the nation in sickness and death was about to reach its final destination. But then, something strange happened. The angel paused. For the first time since this judgment began, the mighty messenger stopped moving. There, hovering between heaven and earth above Araunah's threshing floor, the angel stood motionless. The sword remained drawn, but didn't swing. Death waited at Jerusalem's doorstep, but didn't enter. David looked up and saw what few humans have ever seen and lived to describe. There, suspended in the air, was God's messenger of judgment. The Bible tells us in 1 Chronicles 21:16, David looked up and saw the angel of the Lord standing between heaven and earth, with a drawn sword in his hand extended over Jerusalem. Can you imagine seeing such a sight? The king who had faced giants and lions now fell to the ground in terror. He tore his royal robes and put on rough sackcloth instead. The man who had once proudly ordered his soldiers counted, now counted nothing but his own failures. "I am the one who has sinned and done wrong," David cried out. "These are just sheep. What have they done? Let your punishment fall on me and my family instead." The king who had made a terrible mistake now took full responsibility for it. The shepherd of Israel offered himself in place of his flock. The angel remained frozen in place, not because its power had run out, but because it waited for new instructions. This wasn't a tired messenger needing rest. This was a perfect servant waiting for its master's voice. The sword that had brought death to thousands remained poised to bring the same to Jerusalem. The entire city held its breath. Would the holy city be spared? Would God's chosen capital be wiped out? Everything hung in the balance as the angel waited, sword still drawn. Then, something amazing happened. God spoke again. "Enough," he said to the angel. "Withdraw your hand." The message of judgment paused, as a new message of mercy prepared to take its place. Why did God stop the angel at Jerusalem's edge? Was it because of David's prayer? That was part of it. But there was something more. Jerusalem wasn't just any city. It was the place God had chosen for his name to dwell. It was the city of his covenant promise. The very spot where the angel paused, Araunah's threshing floor, was part of God's bigger plan. This wasn't just a random location. God chose this exact spot for the angel to stop, because this threshing floor was about to become something far greater. The place where judgment paused would soon become the place where worship gathered. The spot where death waited would transform into the spot where life was celebrated. The story wasn't over yet. The angel's sword was still drawn. The plague hadn't officially ended. David still needed to do something important before this crisis would truly be over. But in this moment, we see something powerful about how God works. Even his judgments have limits, and his mercy always waits at the edge of his justice. How does a message of death become a foundation for worship? This question stands at the heart of what happened next in Jerusalem. With the angel's sword still hanging over the city, God sent a new message, not of judgment, but of hope. The prophet Gad rushed to David with fresh instructions from heaven. Go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Not just anywhere, but exactly where the angel stood, suspended between heaven and earth. The spot where judgment paused would now become the place where mercy triumphed. When David reached the threshing floor, he found Araunah working there. Seeing the king approach in sackcloth, Araunah bowed low. "Why has my lord the king come to his servant?" he asked. David explained his mission to build an altar and stop the plague. Without hesitation, Araunah offered everything, for free. "Take it all. Here are oxen for the burnt offering, and the threshing sledges and ox yokes for the wood. Let my king take whatever he wishes and offer it up. May the Lord your God accept you." But David's response shows us something powerful about true worship. "No," the king insisted. "I will not offer to the Lord sacrifices that cost me nothing." Even in this emergency, with thousands already dead and Jerusalem hanging in the balance, David understood a truth we often forget. Real worship always costs us something. So David paid the full price, 50 shekels of silver for the threshing floor and the oxen. This wasn't just a business deal. This payment represented something deeper. David was saying, "God deserves my best, not my leftovers." Can you picture the scene? The angel of death hovers above with drawn sword. The people of Jerusalem watch from behind closed doors. And there stands their king, building an altar, stone by stone, right under the angel's sword. His hands must have trembled with each stone he placed. One wrong move, one proud thought, and the angel might finish what it started. When the altar was complete, David prepared the sacrifices. These weren't just animals burning on stones. They represented what God wanted all along. Not David's strength, but his surrender. Not his independence, but his dependence on God. Each sacrifice said what the census had failed to say: "We need you, God. We're nothing without you." As the smoke rose toward heaven, something amazing happened. The Bible tells us in 1 Chronicles 21:26, David built an altar to the Lord there and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. He called on the Lord, and the Lord answered him with fire from heaven on the altar of burnt offering. Fire from heaven. God himself lit the sacrifice. This wasn't just acceptance. This was divine confirmation. The message had been received. The lesson had been learned. Pride had been replaced with humility. And then, the most beautiful sight of all, the angel sheathed its sword. The same mighty being who had brought death to 70,000 people now put away its weapon. The plague stopped. The message was complete. The suffering ended. But this wasn't just the end of a tragedy. It was the beginning of something greater. David looked at this spot where judgment had paused and mercy had won, and he declared, "The house of the Lord God is to be here." This very threshing floor, once just a place where farmers separated wheat from chaff, would become the foundation of Solomon's temple. What started with counting soldiers ended with counting blessings. What began with pride finished with worship. The place where an angel brought death became the place where people would find life through sacrifice and prayer for generations to come. That's how God works, turning our messes into messages, our tests into testimonies, our altars of judgment into altars of mercy. But what if we told you there were angels even more terrifying? Angels who didn't need days or weeks to deliver judgment, but could destroy entire cities in just hours. That's exactly what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah. Two mighty cities filled with wealth and power were turned to ash faster than you can imagine. No warning, no escape, just fire from heaven that fell like rain. These weren't gentle messengers. These were warriors of heaven with powers beyond our understanding. They could strike entire crowds blind with just a wave of their hand. They could call down fire that burned hotter than anything on earth. But the most shocking part? Even Abraham's desperate prayers couldn't stop them. There's a reason God sent these specific angels, and it reveals something about divine judgment that most people completely miss. Why didn't God wait another day? What made these cities so evil that heaven couldn't delay justice any longer? And what warning does this hold for our world today? Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to discover the full story of the angels who erased Sodom and Gomorrah. Once you learn why they acted so swiftly, you'll never look at God's patience the same way again.